Greetings, friends. I have nothing against astronauts. I knew a lady who I later found out was an astronaut. And she was pretty cool, pretty chill for a woman. But that's because I think if a woman's going to go into space, she might have to have a little bit more testosterone than the average woman. I think women have trace amounts of testosterone. Like they have some levels, not like a man, of course, but yeah, they do put significant numbers of women in space. That's an interesting thing about it. But I guess that keeps up with what's been happening in the military, like the U.S. Army, and like on a U.S. aircraft carrier. There's going to be plenty of women working there. But that's another topic related though. But I just noticed that astronauts are celebrated in our culture, and that's what I'm questioning. So nothing personally against anyone who, works in these fields. It's pretty cool, pretty advanced stuff, among the most advanced stuff on Earth. But I think along with being in advanced technology, there's all these dark influences and a lot of really shady, questionable, weird stuff going on. I mean, that happens in government, that happens in big corporations too. But certainly there's something odd about the whole space thing. But rather than ponder about all that, let's just look at the question of what does being an astronaut involve, and why should we celebrate it? Like in Canada, Chris Hadfield is a celebrated icon. He's promoted by the CBC, which is state broadcasting, and he's easily gets good treatment in the media. Why? Because he has a very safe, docile personality, which you could plug with anything really. There's not really much personality there. His original claim to fame was he was Canada's astronaut on the International Space Station, and he played a David Bowie cover with his guitar. He couldn't particularly sing, and that's fine. I can't sing either. I can't sing at all. So, but I'm just saying, like, it got a lot of exposure, and the guy clearly couldn't sing the David Bowie song. I never listened to David Bowie. But so it was more than that. Obviously, that was just, something they were using to make him a persona, a personality, and you can be him. And he's just a white guy with a weird mustache and kind of a square head. And like not too tall, but not too short. Why on earth would you want to be an astronaut? I think astronauts, we should pity them on the whole. At least, generally speaking, we should pity astronauts, not celebrate them. In one sense, they don't do missions anymore, not like back in the 60s and the 70s. Whatever you think of the truth of the moon missions, they had men back then doing real serious missions where they were actually trying to get from one point to another. I know many people don't believe in the moon missions, or even they question what is space, but whatever. If anything, there's military doing stuff in the high atmosphere. So let's just say that military actions in the high atmosphere. So it was just a different thing going on back then. Now it's all this different international thing. Like the Russians and the Americans came together after the Cold War. They didn't get the Chinese on board, but they did get the Japanese, the Canadians, and then the European Space Agency, which I guess is going to include all the NATO countries, so there could be Germans or whatever. I don't know about Australia or New Zealand, but anyway, so those are the nations that operate send astronauts to the International Space Station, which is still around today. I think it was put up in the 90s, I believe. So it's been around for a few decades already. It's still up there, and they add modules here and there, so it gets bigger, and it's just continuously in orbit. I guess it's slowly falling to Earth, but I don't know. They can extend its life or not, but if you're not in the International Space Station, then you might be on a shuttle flight. But otherwise, that's it. That's all astronauts do today. They don't go to the moon. They don't go to Mars. I know Elon Musk is trying to do that. But as far as we know for now, it's, you know, we have no decent guarantee that we're going to see that in our lifetimes. I hate to break it to you. But you can be optimistic about it. But even so, even if we did go to Mars in our lifetimes, the point is, then you're going to Mars. Then you're doing a real mission, and that's not what's happening right now. That's my point. Is astronauts now, as we know them, they stay in space, so you're not really doing much of a real mission. Yet they are performing scientific experiments primarily, but they're also guinea pigs. So you might be noble, like, oh, you're a scientist in space. That's pretty cool. But you're working in a space which is going to have so many taxes and debts to your body, maybe your mind. Maybe some people like it up there, but to your body. For one thing, your muscles are going to atrophy, so they have to constantly exercise to maintain the muscle mass, because you're not using any muscles, because it's supposedly weightless. That's whatever gravity really is. It's not actually completely weightless, because there's different forces operating, but yeah, relatively it's weightless, and so you have to maintain your muscles constantly. But even then, it's not enough. When they come back to Earth, their muscles are shrunken, and also their bone density decreases in space. So and they're up on the international, I'm talking mainly on the International Space Station, so I should have clarified. I don't know about shuttle missions, how long they're up in orbit for. Maybe they're up for some time too, so they'll probably suffer from something too. But on the International Space Station, yeah, you're up for like months at a time. They're more prone to infection up there, so that your immune system is decreased. But if anything, so your bones, your muscles, so this is not something anyone is going to want to do to your body. And I know they say that they can recover on Earth, and they do recover, but that's not good. Who knows what it's doing to your brain? Who knows what it's doing to your blood pressure? There's no privacy up there. You're constantly being told what to do. The one astronaut they were interviewing, he was basically saying, you're at work from like 7:30 to like 7 p.m. at night. And they get breaks and stuff, but it's like you're at work, but you never go home. Even though you can take breaks, it's like you live in the workstation. So I guess that's no different from the military, but this is on the military. At least they have, there's Navy ships or submarines. You can't really get away. So in some sense, it's like being on a submarine or a battleship. But even then, that's a little different, because they can still get out on the deck and do whatever. But you're in an enclosed environment for all this time on the space station. And apart from when you sleep, or when you're urinating or defecating, you really have no privacy. And they don't have any real toilets up there. They have a weird hose, and just like that's not anything you could call a toilet. The astronauts are continually getting tested on, relaying all their biological data back to ground control, like their heart rate, their pulse, maybe even their brain patterns. They're going to be, think of all the communications they're going to be having with ground control and people on the ground that they don't tell you about, that we don't hear about in the documentary. Like, they're going to have a psychological counselor, I'm sure. And they're going to be asking them all sorts of interesting questions. And who knows what kind of psychological experiments astronauts have been subjected to. My friend, he was on the astronaut question, but this could go for the military too, in general. This could go for many different groups. But particularly like the situation of being on the International Space Station, because you're in this like one-on-one relationship with like a psychology counselor back on the ground, and they tell you. I'm not saying they did this, but it's like we imagine them saying, it's like one time it's like, so how are things going up there? You're not depressed, are you? No? Well, you're doing very well. You're doing very well, Devin. And we've been thinking, so we'd like you to do something for us. Can you do that? So we need you to tell a lie to someone on the shuttle. It can be the lieutenant. lieutenant, it can be your commanding officer, it can be someone else on your level. But tell a lie about something that is obviously false and that they should call you on. And not something that's going to cause like a fatal situation, obviously. But, think of something that could be misreported. If they call you out on it, it's like just say, oh, that's right. And we know they were getting them to have sex in space. So you never know what sorts of weird things they could be doing to people's minds up there. And like I said, they're constantly being told, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. You have to obey orders all the time. I mean, there's nothing wrong with obeying orders on its face, but this is just what you have to deal with constantly. And then the food is awful. It's basically comes in these vacuum sealed bags that you just have to slurp whatever's in there out. So there's no real. I mean, you can heat. I guess they have microwaves and stuff to heat. But yeah, it's not like you're going to be eating very good food. It doesn't matter if it has the right nutrients. The food is not prepared in the right way to eat, and eating it in space or even drinking, like you can't have tea or anything there because all the liquid has to come out of a little bag, and you have to be very careful even when a liquid or a food item comes out into the open air, because it can easily, like particles can start to spread throughout the shuttle, so you have to be careful when you're eating, because that stuff could get into electronics somewhere. There's no up or down here, so because they have a very limited supply of water on the International Space Station, then they have to recycle everything. They even recycle the urine. Like they take out the bad stuff from the urine, and the water, they filter it out. And then that water goes into the general supply again, which ends up getting drunk by the astronauts. So you're literally drinking the water from your own urine when you're in space. At least on the International Space Station. Oh, and the whole solar cycle, it's basically the sun is going up and down at every 45 minutes, kind of in a circle. So I don't even know, maybe it goes around the horizon a little bit, but where they are in their orbit, I don't know if it's at the equator but they don't really have a proper day and night rhythm at all. The sun is constantly going up and down. And then there's all the radiation from the sun, and that's one reason why they paint the whole thing mostly white on the outside. All the space station is white. Most of it's white on the inside too. There's different colors, but it all looks wacky, tacky colors. So the aesthetic even on the inside, it's just purely, brutally technical and technological. And the thing called the cupola, which is like an Italian imitation cupola, where you can see the Earth from all these cool windows. It has some symmetry. It's like, okay, that's kind of cool, but that's as close as you're going to get to any beauty on the International Space Station. It's sort of like the expanding Borg, just like assimilating more components. And I noticed that a lot of the men that I saw there, certainly a lot of the Europeans and Americans and Canadians, like they did look like they looked in okay shape, but I noticed that they didn't have necks. Like many of them, they had like no discernible neck. And it's not like they were super stocky, but there was a bit of a stockiness to their body type, their body structure. So you can't be too tall, but you probably can't be too short. You got to be, maybe around 5'9", 5'10". That's a good height. And again, the physiognomy of these men with the stockiness. I noticed the same thing when I watched a documentary on an American nuclear submarine, and how there was a certain physiognomy to most of the crewmen, like a little stocky, like certainly. Like my physiognomy, I wouldn't be able to hack it in space. I wouldn't be able to hack it in the Navy. Like I'd be too fragile. Because to be in space and to be on a submarine, your body has to take a lot of hits. I don't mean literal punches, but like a lot of shocks to your body. The pressure changes, like the diet changes, lack of sunlight, isolation, like psychological, whatever. Like, how are you going to sleep in this situation? Some people say they can sleep fine. Some people have trouble. So you have to have like enough, just like physical weight on your body. I don't mean necessarily like fat, but some combination of slightly bigger bones, bit more muscle and fat. So you've got somewhat of a stockiness, maybe even a little bit of a lumpiness. It doesn't hurt to have a little bit of lumpiness if you want to take these shocks that living on a nuclear submarine for months on end or weeks on end, going under the Arctic or something like that. Same thing for space. Well, maybe not quite the same, because women are going to space, they can hack it too. But, it's going to put a stress on all of their bodies. I know they say they get better and then it's like, oh, they go back into space, but is that something you really want to be repeating over and over again in your lifetime if you're an astronaut? I'm not saying the same thing for being in the Navy, but I did notice there are certain physiognomies here that are going on, but not just the physiognomy, a bit, the character, the mindset. And I'm not saying this about everyone in the military. No, I mean, I think, being in the military, if you do it for the right reasons, that's a noble thing. But sometimes you do notice that, yeah, there's a certain character type here. There's a certain, it's not necessarily submissiveness, but probably not the best sense of humor in these sorts of people. These people are definitely being programmed from high on up. And by the way, Chris Hadfield is a moron, and he's probably just a tool of the deep state, and he's probably been programmed so deeply. I'm not just, like, I'm serious about the psychological experiments. Like, even in this documentary that I watched, and this was like a mainstream documentary that was from like 10 years ago, they were talking about how the Russians, they did perform an experiment where they sent, because they send women to space, like all the nations do, which is another interesting thing, like putting men and women in that situation. Like I said on the like the U.S. aircraft carriers, they have men and women there, and then sometimes they have like parties, or just not like real parties, but they have something like a spring break sort of thing. I'm talking about U.S. aircraft carriers, and then I go ashore, and then like the men and women from the U.S. aircraft carrier, maybe other nations do this too, that they all go drinking together, and they probably hook up, and whatever is happening, and like you are in the military, mixing men and women in this scenario. It's extremely questionable, but you see the same thing in these space agencies. And the Russians, as I was saying, they did send up this woman, supposedly, allegedly, that it's like, yeah, she's going to have sex with one or two other Russian cosmonauts. And they did perform this experiment. Allegedly, that's what the documentary was saying. They were trying to see if she could get knocked up in space, impregnated, and they weren't successful with that. But the narrator of this documentary, this German documentary, the guy, he tried to make light of it. He said, oh, we have a saying, we have a joke, like space is the only place where you need 3 people to have sex. Ha ha ha. Because you need one person, you need the 2 people to copulate and the third person to hold them down from floating away into space. I mean, I suppose you could be tied with Velcro or something, but that's what he said. And quite seriously, I mean, like, I don't think he was, like, joking. I think he was meaning that literally, but kind of, like, making fun of it. Like, ha, 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 isn't that funny? They do that. The cosmonauts were encouraged to do that in space. Ha, 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 ha. Yeah, I found that a little disturbing, and just, yeah, like, that's extremely disconcerting. And I mean, like, what would that be like for like the other astronauts on the station? And that's the thing, they've talked about how you're putting these different nations, like even the Japanese and the Americans, and how they have different cultural customs. So it's like this United Nations kind of globalist, we can all do it together model. You see how this is starting to go deep into esoteric, elite kind of manipulation sort of stuff, occult sort of stuff. It's moving in that direction. Like they're acting out their ideology. Well, they're acting out deeper principles that they believe in. And in a way, I think the International Space Station is like a dark, occult temple, literally floating in the sky. It's like literally we have a sky temple. And like some of the pagans, like maybe some of the druids or peoples like that, they are bathed in, they're covered in white. Now, I know not all the astronauts wear white, but the aesthetic of white, to reflect the sunlight. But there's a lot of white on the inside too. White and gold. I think they use gold for another reason too, maybe reflective. So they use these very striking colors, mystical colors almost. I'm not saying they're doing rituals up there or anything. They are doing science, and science is fine. Science is good. But just sort of in a symbolic sense, but maybe in some not symbolic senses, maybe in some ways that we're not really sure of, we don't really know about right now, but it does sort of fulfill that function, that it captures the imagination of people who love science so much. And again, there's nothing wrong with loving science, but then it starts to fall into scientism, and starts to fall into what we see now in our current age, where the scientists are a priestly class, and we've seen the medical, the doctors, they've been a priestly class, but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that. So maybe for the next paradigm shift, it'll be something more related to space. So it's almost like this dark temple, a literal sky temple. Again, may not always be there, but so I think that's pretty much most of what I wanted to say. These are not something that you ought to celebrate. You ought to be questioning what's going on up there, what sorts of people make it through to be able to do this, because you have to be capable physically and mentally, but also you have to submit to a lot of stuff too, and that's the questionable thing. Why are you going to submit to something like that? Hasta luego, amigos.